Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our webinar, Unwrapping FDA's MoCRA Labeling Regulations. I'm proud to introduce Anna Benevente, Registrar Corp's Director of Product, Labeling, and Ingredient Review, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the College of William & Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Throughout this webinar, feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box at the top, and we've saved time at the end to answer them. We'll also follow up with a link to the recording so you can refer back at any time. Without any further ado, Anna, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today for the webinar. My goal is going to be to give you all of the basics that importers, manufacturers, and distributors of cosmetic products need to know about cosmetic labeling. First, we'll discuss the general requirements that all cosmetic products should be meeting at this point, and then dive into what changed with the passage of MoCRA. MoCRA imposed additional labeling requirements, so companies must be sure that their cosmetic product labels are in compliance with the new rules. We're also going to discuss what if the product is a drug. Many personal care products are regulated as drugs in the US, even as they are considered cosmetics in other markets. Because the regulation of drugs is very different, we'll discuss how you can determine if your product is a drug and what steps you should be taking. All of these topics will be pivotal to your success in marketing cosmetics in the US. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients across 175 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. We are very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of service to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. Our label review team of experienced professionals hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, human nutrition, pharmaceutical sciences, and cosmetic sciences. As Alexis mentioned, we have reviewed over 13,000 products for compliance and take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements. Our first order of business is to go over all of the general requirements that cosmetics should be meeting right now. FDA has had labeling requirements for cosmetics in regulation for decades, but enforcement has not always been very rigorous. But that is likely to be changing now with a new focus and scrutiny on cosmetics since MoCRA passed. Let's go over all the general labeling statements that should be on your cosmetic products now. There are certain statements that almost always must appear on cosmetic labeling as shown here, and we'll go into depth on the next few slides to discuss each one. First and foremost is the statement of identity, what the product actually is. FDA requires that it be a common or usual name used in the marketplace, an appropriately descriptive name, or a fanciful name understood by the general public. FDA seems to allow a lot of leeway with this. For example, we've never seen FDA take issue with the products called body milk, even though they are clearly not milk. The agency even allows for an illustration or a vignette depicting use of the product, although it seems few companies will rely solely on this. FDA does have some conditions on this statement, though. It should not reference a single ingredient in the name if other ingredients are present in the product, even if those are declared in the ingredient statement. For example, a mixture of oils could not be called argan oil, even if argan is the most prevalent oil in the mixture. The statement cannot be false or misleading in reference to any other food, drug, cosmetic, or device. The statement also needs to be clear to consumers, so FDA requires it be in bold type, reasonably related to the largest printed matter on the label, although they don't really define what this means. And it has to be on the principal display panel and parallel to the base of the package. The principal display panel is the part of the label that is most likely to be displayed, presented, shown, or examined under customary conditions of display for retail sale. The next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container on that principal display panel. Solid and viscous products are declared by weight and must include the term or abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are declared in terms of volume. FDA has some allowances for trade custom. For example, my facial moisturizer is declared in terms of volume, even though it's clearly viscous. And so this is pretty common in the cosmetic industry, and FDA seems to consider it to be appropriate. Please do note that you must include both metric and imperial terms of measurement in the statement. Most cosmetics, except for single ingredient cosmetics, must declare all of their ingredients on the package. Most of these ingredients must be declared by their common or usual name, which is usually the INCI, but with some changes expected by FDA. For example, you may not use CI numbers for colors. Most have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses. So for example, if you have a mixture of preservatives that you're using, you may need to go ahead and declare them all individually. The ingredients must be in descending order by weight, but there are some modifications for this declaration for ingredients that are present at or less than 1%, and for the manner in which color additives are declared. There are some exceptions to the rules for certain ingredients, such as flavors and fragrances and certain shaded products, which are allowed to group all of the colors within one may contain statement if they are present in the entire line of that particular shaded cosmetic. Because they can vary so much from product to product, FDA does not have many regulations related to directions and warnings, but companies must be sure to ensure that any and all necessary directions and warnings are present to ensure safe use by a consumer. FDA has published some regulations that mandate specific warnings for certain products. Some of those are products that are in self-pressurized containers, the skin patch test statement for coal tar hair dyes, others that are required for feminine deodorant sprays and self-tanning products. FDA also requires a tamper evidence statement and tamper-resistant packaging on certain types of products as well, such as liquid oral hygiene and vaginal products. Also, companies must note that there's a specific warning and regulation that must appear on the principal display panel if the product or any ingredient in the product has not been adequately substantiated for safety. Every cosmetic product needs to declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. You may choose any of these three options to meet this requirement. Note that it has to include the actual corporate name and the full address, although you may omit the street address portion of that if it is found in a local directory. FDA must have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover a problem with the product. It can be a U.S. or non-U.S. entity. This entity serves as the responsible person in the context of MoCRA. So it is different than the role of the responsible person in other markets, such as the European Union. While it's not an FDA requirement, it is important to know that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. This includes FDA-regulated cosmetic products. This country of origin is the country where the last substantial transformation took place, and it must appear on all retail cosmetic labels. Also important to understand that you may only use abbreviations for countries that are deemed acceptable by customs. So for example, PRC is not an acceptable abbreviation for China, as a US consumer may not understand that it stands for People's Republic of China. While many companies understand that mandatory information must appear on cosmetic labels, it is also important to note that FDA has strict placement requirements as well. Here we can see what FDA requires for the principal display panel, which is the panel that the consumer will see under customary conditions of display for retail sale. The PDP must include the name of the product, so this may be, for example, a brand name or something fanciful like that, the statement of identity, the safety substantiation warning if applicable, and the net quantity of contents. Notice that the practice of putting the net quantity on a different panel is not permitted here. Other information may appear on just about any other information panel, but note that it cannot appear on the bottom panel, as this is not considered conspicuous enough. The information panels will need to include directions, warnings, the ingredient list, the declaration of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor, whichever one you select to use, and then any other information that FDA is requiring for your product. FDA has fewer requirements for the inner or primary container. The front panel will need to have the name of the product. The statement of identity is optional, but it is usually included for consumer clarity. The information panels will have to have the same information as the outer container, with the important exception of the ingredients list. Ingredient declarations will not be required on the inner container. Also, the net quantity of contents may appear on an information panel as well. Claims are a very important part of the intended use and marketing of cosmetic products. Of course, companies want to highlight all of the benefits that will come from a consumer using their products, especially in the extremely competitive personal care products industry. Companies need to be aware of FDA's enforcement on product claims, particularly on imported products that can be inspected in port. FDA's enforcement is rooted in the regulatory and legal definitions for cosmetic and drug. By definition, cosmetics may only be intended for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance, while drugs are defined as products that are intended to affect the structure or any function of the body, as well as those intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent disease. This part of the drug definition means that claims that a product has an effect on the structure or function of the body can cause the product to be deemed a drug, even if it does not contain an active pharmaceutical ingredient. Cosmetics should achieve their effects through superficial rather than structural change. The benefits that are described should be linked to a cosmetic function, such as moisturizing or exfoliation. So for example, a claim that a wrinkle is erased due to collagen production in the skin may be inappropriate. But a claim that wrinkles are less noticeable because of moisturizing or exfoliating may be considered acceptable. Claims that exceed what FDA considers to be appropriate can result in product detention and refusal. In addition to regulations regarding the mandatory statements that must appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to other labeling and formulation issues. Color additives are one of the biggest enforcement issues for FDA-regulated products in general, not just for cosmetics. FDA requires that all color additives be approved by FDA for their intended use. Even if a color is safe, such as gold, if it is not specifically approved, then it is not permitted in products intended for the US market. Approval can also be specific to certain areas of the body. For example, to use a color in a product intended for the eye area or the lip area requires specific approval from FDA. Also, some colors such as sunset yellow and allura red require what is called batch certification as FD&C or D&C colors. This is a process by which the manufacturer of the color additive submits an actual sample from each manufactured batch and sends it to FDA for testing. Another common practice is to include languages other than English on the product label. FDA requires English and states that if any mandatory information is presented in another language, then all mandatory information must be presented in that language. Brand names and mottos appear to be exempt from this requirement if they do not convey material information about the product. Organic cosmetics are gaining a foothold in the marketplace due to the consumer desire for clean beauty products. If you choose to use and include the USDA organic symbol on your labeling, then you must follow USDA's rules, which may be based on the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, may require certification by a USDA accredited agent, and may require disclosure of that agent's information on the label. Here are some of the common mistakes that we find that companies make related to labeling. Because they are permitted elsewhere, companies may use the CI numbers instead of the actual name of this ingredient. We see a lot of detentions of cosmetic products due to claims being made, such as increasing collagen production in the skin and suppressing melanin to remove age spots. As a reminder, any claim that implies any sort of change to the structure or function of the body can cause the product to be deemed a drug. Since only a handful of countries use the imperial or avoirdupois system, they may not add it to the metric declaration on their labeling. We often see also languages that incorporate additional languages but do not repeat all the mandatory information in that language. And uncertified colors, such as allura red, can cause a product to be deemed adulterated and refused entry into the US. FDA maintains an import alert that lists hundreds of products that have been detained and now are being detained without any physical examination because they were shipped using uncertified or unapproved colors. Now moving on to the news of the day. Implementation of the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act of 2022 is underway, and many of the new requirements are being imposed upon companies in the cosmetic industry. This includes labeling, so it's critical to know what is changing as MoCRA transforms the cosmetics landscape. There are three main areas that MoCRA will impact on cosmetic labeling: professional use products and what their labeling must include, a new adverse event content or contact declaration, and a declaration of certain fragrance allergens that are present in the product. Professional use products are now subject to the same requirements as consumer products. A professional use product is one that is not sold to retail consumers, but instead only to professionals who are licensed to practice in the field of cosmetology, nail care, aesthetics, and barbering. These products were previously exempt from certain requirements, but now must bear the same labeling as retail consumer products, as well as a prominent statement that they are for licensed professionals only. At this time, though, FDA hasn't provided any guidance regarding where the statement must appear or how it should be phrased. It's also important for companies to know that this will also apply to products that are cosmetics, but also regulated as drugs by FDA that are for professional use, such as sunscreens. Prior to the passage of MoCRA, there were no adverse event reporting requirements for cosmetics at all. This changed under MoCRA, with companies being required to report serious adverse events to the agency. And as a natural extension of this, also include a contact on the product label that a consumer can use to submit a report of an adverse event to the responsible person. This requirement goes into effect at the end of this year. It must be a domestic U.S. address, domestic U.S. phone number, or electronic contact information, such as a website. At this time, FDA has not commented on other forms of electronic contacts, such as email addresses or QR codes. The law only mentions the website as an example. FDA has told us that they will be issuing guidance regarding digital labeling options, but so far we haven't seen anything published. But we're eagerly anticipating to find out more and hope that that will be coming soon. In our opinion, the most groundbreaking labeling requirement under MoCRA, and the one that may be the most burdensome on industry, is the fragrance allergen disclosure requirement. FDA was supposed to issue a proposed rule with the list of allergens that FDA may require be disclosed at the end of June. At this time, it has not been published. However, based on the Office of Management and Budget RegInfo site, it is now scheduled for October 2024. The proposed rule should include the list of fragrance allergens and allow for a specific period during which the public may submit comments to the agency. FDA is required to consider these comments before issuing the final rule with the final fragrance allergen list, and that will come 180 days after the public comment period has closed. Note that products that function as both cosmetics and OTC drugs, such as some sunscreen makeup products, skin protectants, and acne cleanser type products, these will also be subject to this requirement. So what is important for companies to consider now? Because of the time required to develop and print labels, it is critical that you start now if you have not already. You must determine how your firm will handle updating the new label requirements and be aware of the deadlines. Professional use products were supposed to be in compliance with the new requirements as of last December. You will need to determine how your adverse event contact will be listed on the label. If you are using a website, make sure that there's a conspicuous place where a consumer can easily submit a report. If you're using a phone number, make sure that your staff is trained to respond when an adverse event is being reported. As we anxiously wait for FDA to issue the fragrance allergen requirements, identify now which products may be subject to them. We don't have a list yet, but we know that FDA is required to consider what is being done in other markets. As the EU has one of the most expansive lists, that is a good place to start. And finally, determine which products may have extremely small labels that may present a challenge when adding these new requirements. As I mentioned, FDA should be issuing guidance to help companies understand how the agency expects them to meet the new requirements, especially the fragrance allergen list, which can be quite lengthy. Registrar Corp can help you stay on top of this, so sign up for blogs on our website as we'll be publishing this information as it comes out. I'd like to wrap up our webinar today with the same section that I include in practically every cosmetic presentation that I do. But what if my product is a drug and I don't know it? Many companies market products that are regulated in their home countries as cosmetics without realizing as they enter the US market that FDA may consider them drugs, and then they will be subject to a different set of requirements. Generally speaking, FDA classifies products based on their intended use. As I mentioned on a previous slide, there are specific definitions in our Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act for both cosmetic and drug. As this is the law that gives FDA its authority, it also means that FDA has jurisdiction over products that meet these definitions. Again, cosmetics are products intended for cleansing, beautifying, promoting attractiveness, or altering the appearance. Drugs are products used in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease, or those that are intended to affect the structure or any function of the body. The second part of this definition is what allows FDA to regulate certain personal care products as drugs, even those that may not have an active pharmaceutical ingredient. If the claims exceed what is considered appropriate and the reference affects to the structure and function of the body, FDA considers that the intended use and can regulate the product as a drug. Now, many of the products that we tend to think of having cosmetic effects to our appearance are in fact drugs under FDA's regulatory system. So some of the most common ones that we see are products like acne cleansers, antibacterial soaps, fluoride toothpastes and antiperspirants, chapped skin, skin protectants, sunscreens. These products will be subject to a more rigorous set of requirements than cosmetics. The pathway to market for an over-the-counter drug involves two main routes and is quite complex. It must either be formulated and labeled as required under an FDA drug monograph or specifically approved by FDA through the new drug application or the abbreviated new drug application processes. These are also called NDAs or ANDAs. So drug monographs are kind of like recipes, and they're quite handy actually. They're pretty easy to understand, and they specify exactly which active ingredients can be used and at what levels. They also provide the mandatory labeling content that must appear. And so any product that meets these requirements will not require further approval from FDA. On the contrary, the NDA and ANDA processes are typically lengthy and expensive processes, but they do result in the drug being specifically approved by FDA. And so it is a product-specific approval, whereas the drug monographs generally address active ingredients for any, that anybody can use. And so that's the main difference between the two. Companies that manufacture or distribute OTC drugs are subject to stringent requirements imposed by FDA. And so firms that are involved in manufacture, repacking, relabeling, or salvaging must register. And this involves getting a Dun & Bradstreet number. If your company is not located in the US, then you have to have a US agent that is physically within the United States. Labelers, such as brand owners and private label distributors who do not actually manufacture the product, must obtain a specific labeler code from FDA. The product itself must be listed by both the manufacturer and the labeler, and then it will be assigned a specific National Drug Code number called the NDC. This NDC must be referenced in the customs entry information that is filed when the product is imported into the United States. These registrations and listings must be renewed and certified annually, and the manufacturers must inform FDA of the amount of each drug that is produced each year. FDA will also assess what they call user fees on certain submissions and companies that market products, drug products in the United States. OTC drug labeling is much more complicated than cosmetic labeling. Some of the same requirements apply to drugs that we've discussed today for cosmetics, but drugs are also required to declare the established name for the drug. Then the mandatory information for safe use by a consumer is compiled in a drug facts label. You can see an example here. Its content is specified by the monograph for that drug or the NDA or ANDA approval, and you may not deviate from this mandatory content. There are also additional statements mandated by the Code of Federal Regulations that must appear, such as the Keep Out of Reach of Children warning. And you see this drug facts panel. The type size, the spacing, even the size of those little bullet marks is all written into regulation and has to be adhered to. So it's important to understand the formatting requirements for this as well as the content requirements. And it can be very, very complex. and sometimes very difficult, particularly if you're trying to fit it on small packaging. So we do strongly recommend, if you're unfamiliar with it, to get someone who has expertise in drug facts labeling to assist you with the product packaging. OTC drugs also have to have serious adverse reporting requirements to be met. And they, unlike cosmetics, they're not satisfied by the use of a website or other electronic content on the label. So the law requires for drugs that it be a domestic U.S. address or domestic U.S. phone number. We do know that toll-free numbers can be used, but unfortunately an email address or a website isn't going to meet the requirement, unlike the way it does for cosmetics. Personally, I think it's just that the law is so old that it predates when email was a thing, and so they've just never bothered to update it. So unfortunately, it remains the same on the books. So we hope that the information that we've presented gives you a good overview on how to make sure that your company will meet FDA requirements before you market your cosmetic products in the US. If you still find that these rules and regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. We have many ways where we can help you as you begin marketing your cosmetics and OTC drugs to the US. Registrar Corp offers a range of labeling services, all of which are fixed fee. So our highly experienced label review team can assist with both cosmetic and drug product labeling. We offer a full label review for cosmetics and OTC drugs that includes extensive research into FDA's requirements for your product, including whether or not it is subject to a drug monograph or if it meets those requirements. Our team will provide a comprehensive report that details all of our recommendations for compliance, with citations to support every change that we say should be made. Then we also have a very helpful team of graphic designers that will then revise the label to incorporate FDA's mandatory labeling statements, including that complicated drug facts label if appropriate. Most of our graphic designers have been doing this for 10 years or more, so they really know what they're doing, and they can make sure that your revised label is in compliance with all of FDA's requirements. We also offer a label check report for cosmetics. So if you have a pretty good handle on your labeling, but you still want our team to check it over, this may be an excellent option for you. We don't provide a revised label, but we evaluate your labeling and its content, and then provide specific recommendations that you and your team can use to update the label yourselves for compliance. We have many other ways that we can help you with the maze of regulation and requirements that FDA has for cosmetics and drugs. And so we're able to assist with the mandatory registrations and listings for both cosmetics and drugs. Of course, the period for cosmetic listing, the initial deadline we just passed, and last count, from what I understand, we did over 26,000 listings, maybe even more. So we're well versed in FDA systems, which can be quite complicated and difficult to use, particularly if you have a large number of products that need to be listed. Then we also have this amazing adverse event management software for cosmetics. And that's going to help you ensure that any adverse reports are received quickly and efficiently so that you can evaluate them and determine whether you have to file them with FDA if they meet the definition of a serious adverse event. So this system is so cool. It provides you with a website URL or a QR code that you can then apply to all of your packaging. And the consumer would then use that to file the adverse event report. And so then you get it immediately, you know that it's an adverse event, and so you can jump on it quickly and manage it, in time to meet FDA's statutory deadlines. Now, we also have a highly specialized team that can assist you with drug master files, which allow you to keep confidential information confidential while still providing FDA with information that the agency requests for certain submissions. Also, if you plan to market your product in California, there are some state-specific requirements for products that are sold there under the California State Cosmetic Act. So we can assist you with reporting certain products that contain ingredients that are on a list that's maintained by California that are known to cause cancer or birth defects. Some of the ones on this list that are rather common would be, for example, titanium dioxide if it's airborne, Kokomi DEA is on the list. There are a few others that are found in cosmetic products that have to be reported to California. So then we've talked today about the possibility of FDA taking issue with your labeling, and especially if you're exporting to the US. Now, if you do find that you have a shipment detained, do not immediately give up. Some detentions can be resolved, so contact us with the FDA notices of action, and we'll help you understand why it's being stopped and if there's a path to get it released at no charge. Some companies end up on what are called import alerts, where all of their shipments are being stopped without any physical examination. And so Registrar Corp can help you avoid ending up on an import alert, but then we can also have our specialists help you if you're already on one. There's a petition process for removal from import alert. And so if you are on one, we can help you determine how to fix your problems, get shipments going, and then get yourself off that import alert. Then we also have consulting services that are where we can help you if you have needs that don't fit neatly into any of the services that we provide. We do hourly consulting so that we can assist you with whatever your needs may be in any of the areas in which we specialize. So we encourage you to reach out to us if you need any sort of assistance with FDA compliance. So we're based in Hampton, Virginia in the United States, but we also have 20 offices worldwide, so we can assist you in your language and your time zone. So you'll see their contact information here, so please do feel free to reach out to us at any time. We have a lot of free tools on our website as well that may help you determining, whether or not your products are subject to certain requirements. A lot of free information, so please do help yourself to all of that. Okay. Then we also want to say, please mark your calendars. Our next webinar in our series aimed at MoCRA compliance and the needs of cosmetic companies will be with our resident expert, Jacqueline Belomo. She'll be presenting on good laboratory practices, or GLPs, and talk about the regulatory requirements that impact cosmetic companies that have these types of facilities. So she'll present an introduction to the regulations and then the strategies that companies may use to implement them correctly. Jacqueline has a phenomenal background, including 15 years of experience in technical formulation, product development, brand management. Many of her years of experience were done in running these labs that are subject to these requirements. So I strongly urge you to sign up if these regulations are going to impact you or your company. Okay. And so with that, I hope that you found this information helpful, and I'm happy to open up the floor to any questions that you may have. I've seen some hands raised, and I'm sorry couldn't get to them in the middle of our presentation here, but you should have access to the Q&A box. And so please do put your questions there. And so I will get to them as many of them as I can before our time runs out. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open up the box and kind of see what we have here. Okay, so the first question I see is about a urinary tract warning applying to shampoos regarding 21 CFR 740.12 foaming detergents. So there is the foaming detergent bath products warning. From what I recall from the last time that I've actually looked at it, it's a case where it does seem to be specifically for bath products because generally speaking, if you're relaxing and enjoying a bath, you may be in there for quite a while. And so, the warning is aimed at making sure that any sort of, irritation or that sort of type of, adverse, sort of side effect or, bad condition, I guess, could, warn consumer about that. So shampoos, generally speaking, are not going to stay in contact with the body for very long. And so if I would, without having seen the label or any of the conditions of use, I would say, generally speaking, it's not going to apply to a shampoo product. Again, if there's any contact, with genital areas, it's probably going to be incidental and be rinsed off pretty quickly. See, another question, in the case of a customer adding a web page to the label, is it still necessary to have the full address? And is it also necessary to have a phone number? So I believe this is referring to the declaration of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor, as well as the adverse event contact requirement, possibly. So it's important to understand that these are two separate requirements. And sometimes you can meet them with the same declaration, but they are, strictly speaking, distinct from each other. So for example, if you have a declaration of a foreign manufacturer on the label, and you have the full address, which is the only requirement, the full address, and you can omit the street address if it's in a local directory, then you've met that requirement. But then you still have the adverse event requirement, which then you could meet with the web page, potentially with an email address. Again, we're waiting for guidance from FDA about this. The QR code, the electronic contact. So in that way, you've met both sets of requirements. Now, for example, if you are a U.S. distributor that has a product and the U.S. distributor is named on the label with a full address, then they can meet both requirements that way because they've got the responsible person, the distributor declaration to meet that requirement, but then they're also meeting the adverse contact because they have a U.S. address on the label. So depending on the situation, it's just important to understand that you have these two distinct requirements, even though they can be met in numerous different ways. So then in the case where a customer adds an email address on the label, is it still necessary to have the full address, and is it necessary to have a phone number? So there's no requirement under the manufacturer, packer, or distributor requirement to have a phone number. So if you are, though, planning to meet the adverse event contact requirement with the phone number, then you would have it in that instance. So if you have any other questions or certain scenarios, certainly reach out to us and we can help you kind of sort out, how best to meet the two distinct requirements based on where your company is located and the type of information that you want to have on your label. So there's another question here. I don't quite understand the CFR reference, but it's about made in the USA versus manufactured in the USA. So the customs requirement is for non-US articles coming in. Made in the USA for products that are being marketed in the USA is actually considered to be more of, it's regulated by our Federal Trade Commission. It's not actually regulated by customs or by FDA. So the Federal Trade Commission actually has requirements on when you put made in the USA or to a certain degree manufactured in the USA on a label, because it implies that all of the materials and the manufacturing occurred within the United States. And then another good question, does information on Google count towards the city or telephone directory? So that's a funny question and one that we've constantly sort of contemplated, because kind of like with the adverse contact in for drugs, the regulations for these declarations probably predate the internet. And so Google wasn't really considered, I don't think, when they wrote these regulations. So they wanted to know if you were found in a local or a city directory. So we've interpreted as meaning that perhaps Google, or just being able to find the company on the internet may well meet this requirement, simply because the whole point of it is so that FDA can track down the manufacturer, packer, distributor if necessary. And so we've kind of considered that. And then lastly, can the net quantity be both on the front and back panel? It certainly can, as long as the placement requirement itself is met that FDA has put in place. If you declare it elsewhere, then that certainly shouldn't present a problem. Okay, so let's see. Come on to a next question. Question about the recording. So we'll be trying to get the recording of this out within the next couple of days, most likely. So everybody who's signed up should be receiving an email alert that has the recording and some other information about the services that we provide and, contacts with us. Let's see. Okay. Question is, what is the statement of identity? So the statement of identity is the actual identity of the product itself. So that could be face lotion, fanciful name like body milk, like I mentioned before, just kind of whatever that product is. Okay. Let's see. So next question. If we are not a manufacturer in the USA and we don't have any agents, how do you provide the US-based address in case of the adverse event contact? So this is a really good example of when you can use like an electronic contact. So that could be the website. The law itself only mentions websites, but it does say electronic contact. So again, waiting for FDA to give us some clarification on that, but it certainly would stand to reason that the like an email address or the QR code. So for example, our adverse event reporting management system uses a QR code. It's amazing. It then leads the consumer to a form where they fill out all the information that you're going to need for your adverse event report, should it be one that needs to be filed with the agency. And so it prompts them for all that information. So you'll get it all at once, which is very helpful when you consider that FDA has a 15-day deadline to submit. So strongly encourage people to at least consider our services for that, but know that if you are a non-US company, you can rely on a website or some other sort of electronic contact to meet the adverse event requirement. Okay, let's see. Okay. Next question. Does the US FDA provide positive and negative lists of ingredients like the EU directives do? So unfortunately, FDA does not have ingredient regulation to the degree that are found in other markets. The only ingredients that FDA really has regulations for are color additives, and they're either approved or not, and your color is either on the list or it's not. So that can present kind of a conundrum for companies. They really should be following GMPs and independently, affirming whether or not their ingredients are going to be safe. FDA doesn't have lists of what they consider to be acceptable or not as far as non-color additive ingredients go. Okay, so then the next question, how often does FDA review or change the rules or guidelines? So for example, once every 3 months or so. For cosmetic products, it doesn't happen very often. So if you've listened to any of our other webinars about MoCRA, one of our big introductory statements is that this is the biggest change to cosmetic regulation, in the last 80 years or so. There's not been much in terms of cosmetic regulation. Because of series of events within the last decade or two, the focus has been on cosmetics more and more, and I think they're realizing that some oversight is definitely necessary. It's definitely not a case where things change every 3 months. You won't see something like MoCRA come out every 3 months or even every year or so. Now, MoCRA does have, though, a lot of requirements in it that have been spaced out over the next couple of years. So we're seeing, for example, the fragrance allergen list, knock on wood, is going to be proposed in October. There'll be a public comment period, and then they'll have a final list 180 days after that. And then they'll probably give a time period, maybe a year or two, for companies to update their labeling. There are other requirements like GMP requirements will be coming out within the next year or two as well. So MoCRA in and of itself is going to cause a lot of change over the course of the next 2 or 3 years in the cosmetics industry. But as far as laws such as MoCRA, they're not published all the time. So just focus on MoCRA and allow Registrar Corp to be a resource to you, because we'll be keeping everybody abreast of everything that's changing with MoCRA. Okay. So next question. Do you have an extensive list of acceptable descriptive words for writing marketing copy and claims, just to prevent flagging of the products as drugs? So great question. And so the tricky part is that FDA doesn't have like a single master list of what's acceptable. What they do is issue warning letters to companies where they have found products either, by stopping them in port or by cruising the internet too, and see products that are making claims that they deem inappropriate. So they publish these warning letters, and that is what we use a lot of times to figure out what is FDA saying is appropriate and not appropriate for cosmetic products. There are guidance documents and some informational pages on FDA's websites as well, where they talk about what's appropriate. A lot of them will have links into the warning letters. So, for example, things like cellulite claims or anti-aging products, FDA has resources on their website. And so when we're doing our reviews, that's what we use. We go and do a huge hunt to see, has FDA ever had any sort of comment published, in any of these ways about a certain claim on a cosmetic product. Let's see. So the next question, with the MoCRA requirement of registering cosmetics, do we have any information on how FDA is going to police whether the product's been registered or not? So great question. Their enforcement activities, we're going to get a better sense, certainly, as the year goes on, as to what exactly they're going to be doing. From what we understand at this point, it doesn't seem that registration information may be part of the customs entry, but that could change. We know that they are able to track certainly the whether products have been registered and the company's been registered, products have been listed. We're going to have to kind of wait and see, quite honestly. They're not going to be, from what we understand, they're not going to be forcing recalls or some of the other enforcement activities, but they may be issuing warning letters and things like that when it comes to products that they discover have not been appropriately listed or the facilities have not been appropriately registered. Okay. Let's see. Question, hi, would you mind repeating the issue of made in the USA? If some ingredients are from other countries, would manufactured in the USA be better? So we have done research because this is a claim that we find on the labels. And so even though it's not FDA, sometimes our research goes into these other areas. So the FTC has published guidances and now new regulation within the last couple of years regarding made in the USA claims. And they do allow for what they call qualified claims. And these qualified claims have to be very specific. And so, for example, if you are manufacturing in the USA using non-US raw materials, then you'll want to be very specific and state it that way. So something like that could be deemed appropriate as long as it's very clear, what portion of the product is not actually of US origin. Okay. Let's see. Can you review what does or does not apply to a startup, such as those with less than $1 million in revenue? So excellent question. A lot of startups are concerned about, as they're getting going, and resources have to be carefully appropriated in the best way to help them grow their business. Labeling, generally speaking, is going to apply to pretty much anybody. Even a small startup needs to have that adverse contact on there because, if a consumer has a problem or suffers an adverse event related to the product, need to have that information on there. However, according to some of the other MoCRA requirements, such as record keeping, some of the registration and listing requirements, I think they're going to be more simplified good manufacturing practice requirements on the smaller businesses. So there are some exemptions for small businesses in MoCRA generally. Again, not so much for labeling, but for the other areas. So for example, if you go to our website, if you've not attended any of the other MoCRA webinars that we've given for registration and listing, you can access them on our website. We've got the recordings there. They'll Jacqueline or I, whoever gave it, we'll go through all of those small business exemptions for some of those other areas like GMP and registration and listing. Okay, let's see. Okay, if a website is used on a label for the adverse contact, will it be sufficient to have a generic email address on the website that a customer can contact, or does there need to be a form with specific questions for the customer related to reporting adverse events? So we haven't had any guidance from FDA at all on this to speak of. And so, depending on what you're using, if you're using a website, we would strongly recommend making sure that if a consumer goes to the website, it's very conspicuous and obvious where they should report an adverse event. Because there's a 15-day period from when you receive it, where you have to determine if it's serious, and if it's serious, report it to FDA. And that's such a short time frame when you really think about it. So you're going to want to make it as easy as possible for the consumer and for you also to determine that this is an adverse event. So like a generic or a general email address where all of your consumer complaints are going or orders are coming in, it can kind of get lost in the shuffle. So we think that it's important to have an email address or a QR code or something, or a website that's dedicated solely to adverse event reporting. And then that way that anything that's coming through there needs to be acted upon quickly. We incorporated a form into our system that we have for cosmetic companies, because we know that there's certain information that you're going to need to know in order to determine if it's a serious event and then report if necessary. So in essence, our form forces the consumer to give you that information at the onset, rather than you having to, if you get an email that says, my eyes started turning all red and irritated after I used your eyeshadow, and that's all you get, and then you have to go back and reach back out and say, okay, well, what happened? When did you use it? How long were you using it? Were you using any other eye products at the time? And that wastes time. So we think a form is a great idea, and that's why we have it in our system. But FDA itself has not stated that a form has to be part of this. The law simply states that there's the U.S. domestic address, phone number, or an electronic contact to which the adverse event can be reported. Okay. Let's see. Got a few more minutes, so let me just go ahead and try and get to a few more of these questions. If we don't get to your question, please do reach back out. So we want to make sure that everybody, gets their questions answered, to the extent that we can. Let's see. For True Soap, for True Soap, does the ingredient list on the label have to have the Latin names, or can the common names just be used? So it depends on what you mean by True Soap. FDA has a definition for just soap that's actually exempted from the definition of cosmetics. This, though, is soap that has a very, very narrow definition, and it doesn't have, cosmetic functions like imparting fragrance or moisturizing or, any sort of cosmetic function. It is just meant to clean. Most products in the marketplace aren't going to really meet that definition. I kind of jokingly call it Little House on the Prairie soap, frontier soap, soap that really is just alkali fatty acids, just meant to clean, and that is it. So most soaps, will have moisturizers or fragrances or things like that. So they fall under the cosmetic definition. And so then the question is about Latin names or the common names. So if you're using botanical ingredients, as far as FDA goes, they simply say the common name. So you could just say, lavender oil. I believe in the EU or the inky names oftentimes will have the Latin binomial, the scientific name. FDA has no problem if you include the Latin names, but they only require that the common name be used. Okay, let's see. Okay, so can you speak more to the phone number for adverse events? Does the label require an additional phone number with the word adverse in the label, even though the phone number that lists questions is already present? Okay, so FDA, the law simply states that a phone number is there, that a consumer can find and call to report an adverse event. It does not mandate any sort of descriptor like report adverse events here or anything like that. Just simply there's a phone number or an address or an electronic contact so that a consumer can get in touch with the responsible person that's named on the label. Again, especially if you're using a website, a specialized website or QR code like with our system, we think it's good to go ahead and put that just so that the purpose of it is clear, but the law doesn't actually require it. For drugs and dietary supplements that have the similar requirement for the phone or the address, the law is kind of the same. It doesn't say that you have to do that. And then FDA has guidance for drug and supplement where they state that they recommend but do not require a phrase like that. So it's probably pretty safe to go ahead and say for cosmetics, FDA is going to say the same thing. But again, if you're using an email or a QR code or something that's dedicated solely for that purpose, we would recommend going ahead and qualifying it with a phrase to make that clear. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Okay, next question. Is there a minimum level of sodium fluoride that can be included in a toothpaste to be categorized under cosmetics? Or if the toothpaste has any level of fluoride, does it have to be categorized as a drug? Great question, because usually FDA relies solely on intended use. So if you had a cosmetic toothpaste, they're going to say, okay, it's a cosmetic toothpaste. If you don't make anti-cavity claims, it's considered cosmetic. Sodium fluoride is one of the exceptions to the normal rule. FDA specifically states that sodium fluoride that's used in a toothpaste, that product is automatically a drug. So then it becomes subject to the drug monograph, which has specific levels of sodium fluoride, stannous fluoride, and then sodium monofluorophosphate. I'm trying to remember the full name of it, but those are the three active ingredients that are part of the drug monograph for anti-cavity products. If you have sodium fluoride in your toothpaste, I would say if you don't mind having to jump through the hoops for the manufacture and distribution of drugs in the United States, you may want to just go ahead and keep the sodium fluoride, have it meet those requirements, because then you can make the anti-cavity claims that a cosmetic toothpaste is not permitted to make. So if you need any guidance on that, like I mentioned, we do drug reviews. We can tell you exactly what the percentages are for sodium fluoride and such, what the labeling would say, the drug facts chart, all of that. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, please share if there's any anticipation or insight from FDA on the allergens being labeled. So both Jacqueline and I participate in working groups that are dedicated to MoCRA and contact with FDA through the Personal Care Products Council. And so we're keeping tabs and communicating with FDA, particularly regarding the allergen statements. So all we really know at this point is that the proposed list is coming out in October potentially. That's what was listed on the RegInfo site that we access. There have been a lot of conversations between Personal Care Products Council and FDA regarding this issue. As I mentioned, we know that they do have to take into account like other regulatory requirements in other markets, both stateside, like with California, but then also international markets like in the EU. So we're just sort of waiting to see whether or not they're going to use like the full EU list or whether they'll pare it down. Kind of just sort of waiting and seeing. The good thing, though, regarding the labeling for allergens is that the way the timeline will work, the proposed rule will come out in October, hopefully. Then you will have probably a month or two, maybe more of a public comment period that will close. Then 180 days after that, FDA will have the final list published. Then, because they can't expect everybody to immediately update labeling and figure out allergens, I would anticipate at least a year or two before FDA actually requires it be on the label. I'm on the labeling group, the labeling working group. We're going to be pressing to have FDA give as much flexibility as possible regarding how these allergens are going to be declared. Some cosmetic products are in really small packages. Some will have a lot of allergens. Will FDA allow maybe digital labeling or something like that? So we'll be pushing the agency to, give cosmetic manufacturers and labels some flexibility with how to declare all these allergens. But the good news is that it's going to be pretty far at it. We're talking probably at least another year before we even know what that list looks like. But again, to stay on top, sign up for our blogs. We publish them all the time, and we'll definitely be paying close attention and letting everyone know when these types of situations are being addressed by FDA. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a fun question. How would you regulate nail art products considering MoCRA? So what's really interesting is that nail art, nail polish, of course, is a cosmetic, but even stickers and things like that can be regulated as cosmetics by FDA. Artificial nails, not even just the glues, but the nails themselves are regulated as cosmetics because they're being applied to the body. even if they're acrylic or, stickers and adhesives and things like that. Those are all regulated as cosmetics. So you're going to want to go ahead and follow all of the cosmetic rules for any sort of nail art products. Same with like temporary tattoos. They get regulated as cosmetics. Halloween makeup gets regulated as cosmetics. Wigs don't, which is kind of funny because wigs, FDA contemplated regulating them as cosmetics for a while, and then went ahead and published what's called a compliance policy guide that says, okay, never mind, we're not going to regulate wigs as cosmetics. But there are some interesting things: false eyelashes, cosmetics, not even just the adhesive, but the eyelashes themselves. So if you manufacture those kinds of products, definitely keep that in mind. Okay, let's see. Find another question. And again, please do reach out if I can't get to your question. We're running over a little bit, but I do want to try and go ahead and get to as many of these as I can for everybody who's willing to still hang out with me. Let's see. Okay. Although CI numbers cannot be used exclusively to denote colors on a product label, is it possible to include the CI number in parentheses after the color in key, such as blue 1 CI 42090? Yes. So FDA allows some flexibility when it comes to the cosmetic declarations. So you can include the CI number as long as the FDA name is there. Also, things like water with aqua, they seem to be okay with that. They published a letter that's found actually on FDA's website. If you go looking, you can find it, where they kind of describe what they're willing to do as far as give flexibility. So for example, meal in addition to honey, water, aqua, fragrance, parfum. So they are going to allow flexibility with some of those statements in the ingredients list. Okay. Okay, try and get just a handful more. Do we have to mention the percentage of every ingredient? No. The ingredients lists only require that they be listed in descending order. There are, again, some modifications that are permitted when you have ingredients less at 1% or less in the formulation. There's also the special exceptions for colors. If you had a shaded line like of nail polishes and you want to use just one label for the entire line, then you use the may contain statement, and then you can list all the colors that are used across the line. So there are some allowances, but generally speaking, you're talking descending order by weight, and you do not have to declare percentages. Even if you're making a claim about the product or that particular ingredient, you don't have to include a percentage. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Again, another question about receiving recording of the webinar. We will be sending this out. So definitely keep an eye on your inbox. We'll have more contact information related to our MoCRA services and us. And so you can reach out to us, especially if I wasn't able to get to your question. Please do reach out. And we want to make sure that we serve as a resource to you so that you can come into compliance with all of the maze of regulations that MoCRA has put onto products now. Let's see. Good question here. If we have current inventory without the new label requirements, can that still be sold until it's depleted? So this is a great reason to start updating things now. FDA, generally speaking, for other types of significant label changes, like when they've made some significant changes to food labels and things like that in the past, the way they've generally handled it has been that when a product enters U.S. commerce, if it enters U.S. commerce before the deadline, then they're not going to impose the requirements on that product. It does mean you have to keep careful track of your inventory and know when certain products entered commerce. Usually that means, maybe left the warehouse in distribution, to a Target beauty aisle or a grocery store or wherever it happens to be going. But again, kind of best not to get caught in that position at all. So it's best to get started on this right now. But generally speaking, FDA is not going to go to Target or CVS and start pulling things off the shelves because they're not in compliance, particularly, right as those those deadlines, start approaching and passing. They understand that things, are in the supply chain and may have entered the supply chain before these requirements were actually, the deadlines actually hit. So usually they allow an enforcement period where they're not going to impose any enforcement actions, until a reasonable time has passed. That's usually how FDA, has operated. Okay, so we're a Canadian-based company. If I have a 1-800 number free for Canada and the US, is it considered as a local US number for adverse event contact? So great question, because the intent of the law is that a US consumer can easily get in touch. So if it's a free, toll-free number, then reasonable people would say that that should meet the requirement. The law says domestic US phone number, but in the context of drugs and supplements, they've gone ahead and said toll-free is as an example of the type of phone number that can be used. So we think by extension, a toll-free number may meet this requirement. If you are very concerned, then maybe consider the electronic contact option. But generally speaking, we're hopefully optimistic. I'll use that. Hopefully optimistic that a toll-free number can be used to meet this requirement. Okay, and get to some of my earlier questions. Sorry, there are just so many. Okay, let's see. Sorry, it keeps bumping me back up to the top of the list, and I wanted to get to some of the ones that were sent earlier. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, do fragrance allergens need to be reported to the California Safe Cosmetics Act? So California is interesting because there are two separate acts that you need to be aware of. So one is the California Safe Cosmetics Act, which describes a list of ingredients where there are a list of substances where if they're used as an ingredient, then you're required to report your product to California. You can still sell it in California. That's important to know. You can still sell it, but you do have to report it to the California Department of Public Health. Then there's a separate law that's more recent. It's FIRCA. It's SFFIRKA. It's the Flavor, Fragrance, Right to Know Act, I think. And so that one is a little bit trickier because it deals with the fragrance and allergens in fragrance and flavors. The intent behind that, from what I've seen, is because a lot of times these ingredients are simply declared as fragrance or flavor on labeling. So then a consumer would have no idea, of course, whether or not there's an allergen, linalool or limonene or something like that in there. So SFIRCA will require you to know whether or not any of the fragrance allergens on California's list are present in the product and need to be reported and such. And so that information is found on California's website. You just go to CDPH, the California Department of Public Health, to get that information. Okay, let's see. Okay, and then, okay, a question about whether or not the PowerPoint will be available for download. I don't believe we're sending out the PowerPoint per se, but you will have a copy of the recording being sent so that you can access that if you missed the first part of the presentation. And again, this will, I'm sure, be posted on our website, certainly within the next week or two, and so you'll be able to access it there as well. Okay, so do labeling requirements apply to companies exporting ingredients for manufacturing companies to the USA? So most of MoCRA, and in reality, kind of some of the general labeling requirements are not going to be imposed upon raw materials that are being sent to the manufacturing companies in the US. If you are a raw material supplier, MoCRA generally isn't going to apply to you in most cases. However, you should be aware, though, that whoever you're selling to has to be in compliance with MoCRA. So they may be asking you about things like fragrance allergens. MoCRA has some other requirements like asbestos and talc and PFAS and all of these other issues that even if you are not subject to MoCRA, your client is, and the client's going to need this information about the raw materials that you provide. Okay, so we're about 15 minutes past, so I'm going to do one more question, but then again, if I did not get a chance to answer your question, please do reach out and certainly check out our website. And you've got a lot of information there. We also, for example, do free label assessments. We can do a high-level label assessment for you just to see whether or not we think that there are any issues with your labels. And so you can simply, just by going to our website, you can get access to that. And so submit it, we'll see whether or not we think there's an issue, and then maybe that our services can assist you, or maybe everything looks great and you don't really need to worry and we really can't find anything that could potentially be a problem. Okay, so last question, is the responsible person requirement on the label sufficiently met with the brand being big and clear on the label? The brand also being the same name of which the company name company is made by. Okay, so the responsible person requirement is in essence the manufacturer, packer, or distributor who is named on the label. That entity is required to appear in 1/16 inch type size on an information panel. It has to be the actual corporate name of the company with the full address, although you can omit the street address if it's found in a local directory, or as we've discussed, maybe Google, but basically it's available to anybody that's trying to find the firm. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but please do reach out if we can provide any other resources to you. Thank you very much for participating with us today. Really hope that you found the information helpful, and look forward to assisting you with all of these new requirements, that FDA is imposing. So please do know that we are here for you. Again, I've been at Registrar Corp for 15 years. It's just a joy and a pleasure to work with a group of people that we have here, so dedicated to helping companies with their FDA regulated products. So thanks everyone, and have a good one, and I hope to see you at my next webinar. Take care. Thank you.